Well, hi there, folks. My name is Dara Star Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. Thank you so much for joining me here on KJLH for The Breakdown, where we sit down once a week and we talk about the issues that matter. I want to let you know where you can find me before we get into this week's show. You can find me on Instagram on the KJLH page at Radio Free KJLH. On Instagram, of course, I have a personal page there as well at Dara Tucker B. KJLH also has an app that you can download to listen to the show anytime that you would like, or any of the shows that KJLH offers. The show is also offered in podcast form on the KJLH website, Radio Free KJLH. The website, of course, is kjlhradio.com. So you can find the show in all sorts of ways if you happen to miss it. Of course, we air at 7 p.m. on Sunday nights here locally, and then there is an encore airing at 5 a.m. on Monday mornings. I really appreciate hearing from those of you who are listening on Monday morning before you go into work. Thank you all so much for riding out this year with me. We've been through a lot of ups and downs. And as we're rounding out the year, we're focused now on a lot of these stories that are getting a lot of attention in the weeks just before the inauguration. Of course, the inauguration is not the only thing that is happening. The introduction of a second Trump presidency, which we're all very, very concerned about. But there is actually another news story, believe it or not, surprise, surprise, that is dominating the headlines right now that really is tied to the political climate that we are in right now and the shifting climate that we are about to be thrust into in the coming years. And it's a story that has strangely captured the imagination and has captured the fascination of so many people for a lot of reasons. And I'm talking about the story of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson's murder by 26-year-old Luigi Mangione. And I keep thinking, with how quickly our news cycle turns around in this country, that this news story is going to die down. People are going to have enough of it, especially after Luigi Mangione was caught at a McDonald's. You would think, okay, people are done with their fascination with the story, but it really just keeps getting more and more heat. And I'm asking myself, why are we so fascinated with this story? Well, first of all, obviously, the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of the insurance company United Healthcare, it was done so cravenly, so brashly, right out in the open. He was shot in the back in cold blood by this young man. And for a long time, we didn't know what the motivations were. And Luigi Mangione has become this cult hero of sorts to folks who have a lot of grievances, a lot of understandable grievances with the U.S. healthcare industry. That's a lot of what is fueling this, obviously. And it has put the U.S. insurance industry under a microscope really like never before. We have not really been having this many open conversations about the deep-seated issues with the healthcare industry in this country in a long time. So this has raised a lot of questions, understandably, about what the issues really are with the healthcare system in the United States. I'm one of those folks who has had the privilege of living abroad and seeing how the universal healthcare system actually works outside of the United States. The U.S., if you are unaware, is one of the only so-called developed countries in the world that does not have universal healthcare, something that should be guaranteed to every citizen of any so-called developed country, any wealthy country in the world. We're the only ones who do not have universal health care. And the way that this works outside of the United States is vastly different than it works within the United States. The healthcare industry is such a really gross money-making industry within the U.S. If you've never been outside of the U.S. and you've never had to have health care outside of the U.S., then you really probably have no concept of just how messed up our healthcare system is as it is compared to other similarly developed nations. But as you've probably heard, it's pretty bad. I lived in Switzerland for a time. I was an au pair and a nanny because I studied German in college. And so I went and lived in Switzerland for about a year to try to learn the German language a little bit better, a little bit after I graduated college in the early 2000s. And what those people, the folks that hosted me, what they were responsible for paying for was my health care, because I was not, of course, a citizen of Switzerland. And what they ended up paying for my health care for the entire year that I stayed in Switzerland was about 600 euros, believe it or not. Full-on health care for me for a year was about 600 euros. And I remember experiencing a really bad throat infection, which I would experience that a lot right after I graduated college, in the few years after I graduated college. But I dealt with a really bad throat infection when I was in Switzerland, and it cost me absolutely nothing to be treated for this when I was in Switzerland. And I remember dealing with the same thing right after I came back from Switzerland. And I ended up having to have my throat aspirated. It was really bad, both there and in the United States. But what I ended up being responsible for in the US was about $20,000 worth of care as compared with what I dealt with there. And so those were absolutely identical situations, one of which could have bankrupted me in the United States, whereas in Switzerland, I ended up paying absolutely nothing out of pocket to have that situation dealt with. And we're not even talking about a truly life-threatening situation. As we know, a lot of folks end up going bankrupt in the U.S. because of astronomical medical bills. Medical debt is one of the main reasons that people go bankrupt in this country. Outside of the United States, it is absolutely unheard of to go bankrupt because of medical debt. And so one of the reasons the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, was targeted by this young man was that United Healthcare has played a significant role in how healthcare and insurance has changed in this country over the last 40 years or so. So I want to give you a little bit of insight into why specifically the CEO of United Healthcare was targeted and what the history of this company is. So let's talk about United Healthcare. As one of the biggest names in the U.S.'s healthcare industry, it's hard to avoid. Over the years, the company has grown into a powerhouse, and while it's achieved a lot, it's also managed to become a poster child for what many Americans see as what is wrong with the insurance system. And a lot of folks are just fed up at this point. So I want to give you a little bit of their history. United Healthcare's story starts in 1977. In Minnetonka, Minnesota. Back then, it was called Charter Med Incorporated, and it came along at a time when the healthcare world was dealing with skyrocketing costs and a push for more affordable, managed care options. United Healthcare saw an opportunity and dove into the health maintenance organization. That's an HMO. Okay, we all know that term. Those were becoming more popular at that time. They were focused on keeping costs down and promoting preventative care. So by 1984, the company rebranded as United Healthcare Corporation, and they went public. Now, this move helped United Healthcare grow quickly through acquisitions and innovations, particularly by embracing tech solutions for claims and for data processing. And these early efforts set the stage for its eventual dominance within the industry. Now, the 1990s marked a turning point. United Healthcare expanded its focus to include government healthcare programs like Medicare and Medicaid. By offering Medicare Advantage plans, United Healthcare became one of the largest players in government-sponsored insurance markets. This expansion into publicly funded programs underscored its adaptability, but it also raised questions about its profit motives in sectors meant to serve the public. Now, United Healthcare's growth didn't just come from organic expansion. The company bought its way to the top, okay? Acquisitions like the purchase of Optum in 2011 have played a critical role in their growth. Optum, which manages pharmacy benefits, data analytics, and healthcare services, gave United Healthcare an integrated approach. But these acquisitions have concentrated power in ways that worry healthcare advocates. From buying physician practices to managing data analytics platforms, United Healthcare's sprawling empire represents a new type of corporate healthcare giant. This integration allows United Healthcare to influence almost every aspect of the healthcare process. It's an impressive feat, I will admit, but for patients and providers, it also feels like the company has too much control. In the 1990s, United Healthcare started getting involved with government programs, starting with Medicare Advantage. Now, this allowed seniors to opt for plans that offered more benefits than traditional Medicare. Fast forward a few decades, and United Healthcare became a major player in both Medicare and Medicaid managed care. When the Affordable Care Act, ACA, rolled out in 2010, United Healthcare jumped in, but they eventually pulled back from a lot of the ACA health exchanges, basically because they said it was too expensive. They were losing money. And critics argue that this decision showed a pattern. United Healthcare was prioritizing profits, a lot of times at the expense of expanding access to affordable care. And that's where things start to get messy. Despite their success, United Healthcare has developed a reputation for practices that make life harder for patients. It makes life harder for healthcare providers and even policymakers. One of the top complaints that people have about United Healthcare is that they consistently deny claims, whether it's because of a technicality or an algorithm designed to keep costs low. These denials frequently leave patients without the health care that they need. A 2019 lawsuit said that the company's automated claim review system unfairly rejected claims, hitting vulnerable populations the hardest. Trying to appeal these decisions can feel like running a marathon. It's time-consuming, it's confusing, it's frustrating. And for a lot of people, it feels like the system is set up to wear them down rather than to help them. If you've ever looked at your medical bills or insurance premiums and thought, why is this so expensive? You are not alone. United Healthcare has a lot of negotiating power, but the savings that it secures from healthcare providers don't always trickle down to patients. People frequently face high premiums, deductibles, surprise medical bills. And then there's United Healthcare's subsidiary, Optum Rx, which handles pharmacy benefits. Critics argue that the way it operates adds to the high cost of prescription drugs. With so much happening behind the scenes, a lot of Americans feel like they're being kept in the dark. And another big pain point is the sheer complexity of dealing with United Healthcare. From pre-authorization requirements to billing disputes, the administrative hassle can be overwhelming. Providers face delays in getting reimbursed, and patients are often left navigating a maze of forms and customer calls just to get basic issues resolved. So it's no wonder so many people are feeling so fed up. United Healthcare's size and its influence are another double-edged sword. On one hand, being big allows the company to innovate and negotiate, but on the other hand, it raises concerns about monopolistic behavior. Through its subsidiary Optum Health, United Healthcare has been buying up physician practices and clinics, which gives it control over more parts of the healthcare system. Now, while this might improve coordination, it also means less competition and fewer choices for consumers. Smaller insurers and independent providers often struggle to keep up, and that lack of competition can lead to higher costs and fewer options for patients. The frustrations with United Healthcare are not just about the company itself. They really are a reflection of broader problems in the U.S. healthcare system. So let's look at how this plays out for different groups. For regular folks, the rising cost of insurance and healthcare services is a daily struggle. United Healthcare's high deductible plans frequently leave people paying out of pocket for care that they cannot afford. Add in denied claims and limited networks, and it's easy to see why so many people feel like they're fighting an uphill battle. Doctors and other healthcare providers are also feeling the strain. Dealing with United Healthcare's pre-authorization requirements and payment delays takes time and resources that could be spent on patient care. Even lawmakers have had a hard time tackling the problems tied to companies like United Healthcare. Efforts like the No Surprises Act aim to protect consumers from unexpected bills, but these measures often only scratch the surface. The underlying issues like lack of transparency and profit-driven decision-making remain really difficult to address. So United Healthcare's journey really is endemic of how a company can grow into a giant in its industry while also becoming a source of widespread frustration. Its focus on innovation and expansion has been impressive, but its practices often leave patients and providers feeling like they're stuck in a system that values profits over people. Now, you're probably aware that the man who shot Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, Luigi Mangione, has become something of a cult hero online. And there's been a lot of discourse, a lot of discussion around whether or not this is a healthy thing for our culture. Should we be celebrating someone who targeted someone who was very wealthy and powerful and who he saw as being an overseer of a very oppressive industry? Is this something that should be celebrated? Now, aside from the fact that out-and-out murder should never be celebrated, obviously, I think a lot of this discourse really can be quite disingenuous, especially when we're seeing cases like the one that recently happened in New York, where we saw a man named Daniel Penny be acquitted of murdering Jordan Neely, who was a homeless man who was experiencing a schizophrenic episode. So Daniel Penny, who's a white man, put this man, Jordan Neely, who is a black man, he is homeless, he is suffering from mental illness. He puts him into a chokehold and kills him on the subway for absolutely no reason. He was acquitted this week of criminally negligent homicide. You have the same group of people who are deriding people for rejoicing over the murder of Brian Thompson. You have the same group of people who are chastising folks for celebrating that murder. These people are now celebrating the acquittal of Daniel Penny. Obviously, racial politics, class politics are very much at play here. We saw the same thing happen with George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. We saw the same thing happen with Kyle Rittenhouse, who went to Minnesota and murdered a couple of protesters for no good reason. Folks have a way of justifying murder when it is committed for reasons that they can get behind. And there's a lot of hypocrisy involved. But it's interesting to see some of the pushback that's happened, even in the comments section of someone like Ben Shapiro, who attempted to take this high-minded position of, hey, murder is never right. How dare you celebrate the murder of this very, very wealthy person? He was just doing his job. He was making money. There's nothing wrong with that. Ben Shapiro, of course, is a very conservative commentator. His comment section ended up being flooded with people saying, hey, this is not even a right and left issue. There are people on both the right and the left who have been crushed by the U.S. insurance system. And we fully understand the frustration of this young man who committed this heinous act. Like, don't try to get us to side with this CEO and these very, very powerful, wealthy people. We are all being crushed by this system equally. This is not a right versus left issue. This is an up versus down issue. But in the climate that we are currently existing in this country, like a lot of other issues, this issue has been highly politicized, and you're starting to see people drift off into their highly polarized camps. And even with the murder of Jordan Neely, that black man on the subway who was killed by Daniel Penny, you have a congressman, Representative Greg Steube, out of Washington State, who is co-sponsoring legislation to try to give Daniel Penny, the murderer, a congressional gold medal. And for what? This chest-thumping move that says we can do whatever we want. We can get away with whatever we want. He put this man, Jordan Neely, in a chokehold for 6 minutes and continued to restrain him even after Jordan Neely was incapable of resisting. And now there's this group of folks that wants to lift up Daniel Penny as some kind of a hero. They did the same thing with George Zimmerman. They did the same thing with Kyle Rittenhouse, raising money for him, asking him to come out and speak at various events. It is entirely political, and we are seeing the same thing happen with the murder of CEO Brian Thompson. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of folks would say this really is an example of white-on-white crime. This Luigi Mangione murder of Brian Thompson really doesn't have a whole lot to do with us. We're going to sit back and let these folks solve their own issues. That was a comment that was made by a mutual of mine, Elizabeth Booker Houston, who has appeared on this show. But a lot of folks got upset with her and said, well, how dare you make this about race? But let's not forget, Luigi Mangione, even though he has a very Italian-sounding name, he comes from a very, very affluent family in Baltimore, Maryland. His people have risen through the ranks over the past 70 or 80 years and built an empire there in Baltimore, Maryland. And he has benefited as much from classism as anybody has, as is evidenced by a lot of his old social media posts. Turns out he's a little bit of a red pill tech bro himself. So he's no hero of the working class. He is someone who had been radicalized. He turned to extremism, and he is very much a byproduct of America's racist culture. So he's no cult hero in my estimation. I mean, as a friend of mine put it, it really is a punk move to walk up behind someone and just to shoot them in the back, cold-blooded in that way. That's a punk move. Even though in a lot of people's estimation, a CEO like Brian Thompson oversaw the deaths of many people who were denied care over the years. So really, for a lot of people, this is a question of slow violence versus immediate violence, which is what we witnessed in that surveillance footage. So for a lot of folks, this is just the chickens coming home to roost. Now, the question is, does anything change after this? Absolutely not, in my estimation. We're seeing now that companies are making moves to take the names and background and bio information of these CEOs and all of their board members off of their websites for security reasons. Are we likely to see cost-saving measures by insurance companies like United Healthcare change anytime soon, particularly under a new Trump administration? Absolutely not. What this feels like culturally to me is a middle finger to corporate America in the weeks leading up to what is likely to be an oppressive time for the little guy, and more specifically, a middle finger to the insurance industry in general at a time when a lot of folks are suffering. Is it likely to be anything more than that? I don't think so. I think a lot of folks are just letting off steam and maybe reveling in a temporary populist uprising. And I think what we all just witnessed was something akin to a blood sacrifice for the FU that a lot of us feel like we just received from the powers that be. I think a lot of the celebrating, a lot of the rejoicing has a lot to do with the anxiety that a lot of us are feeling right now, the economic anxiety, the cultural anxiety, the political anxiety that a lot of us are feeling in the wake of this election. A lot of folks are feeling a powerlessness that is not likely to be addressed anytime soon, and that is likely to worsen for a lot of people. So seeing a big bad insurance CEO go down in a way that we really have never witnessed before, for a lot of people, feels like retribution. For a lot of folks, it just feels like chickens coming home to roost. And it's a shame that this is where we are in our society. I have to admit, it's a bit troubling to observe from my point of view, and it almost feels like a harbinger of things to come. We are at a very ugly place right now, and it's not to say this is not a place that we have not been at before, but this time feels unprecedented for a lot of us because we have never been here in our lifetimes. 30 years ago, I think the cold-blooded murder of a CEO in the middle of the street in broad daylight probably would have been viewed as the sadistic act that it actually was. But this craven push towards higher and higher profits by these insurance companies and many other multinational organizations has created a climate that we have not witnessed in modern history. And as Trump and his cohorts are coming into power, once again, proposing tax cuts for billionaires, tax cuts for corporations, this resentment, this alienation is likely to grow. It is not likely to get any better. It's likely to worsen. And the idea that this man could have won on a populist message, claiming that he was going to stand up for the little guy, he was going to bring down prices when he's already admitted that he cannot do that, claiming that he was going to drain the swamp when already he has appointed multiple billionaires to his administration. We know where this is headed, and it doesn't mean that we should throw up our hands and turn a blind eye. It's just the opposite. We should be paying even closer attention right now, and we should be hyper-focusing on local politics as well. The worst thing that we could possibly do right now is unplug and to turn a blind eye, because that's what they want us to do. That is what they are counting on us to do. To say that it all just feels pointless, to give in to this feeling of helplessness, and to stop investing, to stop caring. But we cannot go down that road. We cannot take that stance. We have to bear witness to this, and we have to activate as best we can. That is what we are going to be working towards in the coming weeks and months. And folks, this is nothing that our ancestors did not have to contend with. We are nothing special. As soon as we lick our wounds, and acknowledge that we have suffered a blow, we do our grieving, and then we get back into the fight. I will be right here fighting alongside you. My name is Dara Star Tucker. I want to thank you all so much for listening to the breakdown this week. Remember to follow KJLH on Instagram at Radio Free KJLH. You can find any of these episodes on the KJLH website at kjlhradio.com. They also have an app where you can listen to any of the shows that you hear on KJLH anytime. And you can follow me on my personal Instagram page at Dara Tucker B. Everywhere else, I'm Dara Star Tucker. That's Dara with one R and Star with two. Thank you so much for listening to The Breakdown this week. I'm looking forward to talking with you again next week. And until then, let's learn to shout.